My name is Dee Walker, a 34-year-old software architect at TechVision. For 10 years, I poured my heart into building the algorithm that became our flagship product. When acquisition talks started, I was thrilled until I noticed my boss Trevor systematically erasing my contributions. In meetings, my name disappeared from presentations. In documents, my role shrank to footnotes. But at the $77 million acquisition signing, when the buyer's lawyer paused on a page, I strategically modified everything changed. If you want to know how I outsmarted a tech CEO at his own game, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of corporate justice served. I graduated with a computer science degree from Stanford 12 years ago. While other classmates chased positions at established tech giants, I was drawn to the unpredictable world of startups. I had a passion for creating innovative software that could solve real problems. My professors called me stubborn, but I preferred to think of myself as determined. When you believe in something, you should stand by it, even when others doubt you. TechVision wasn't even called that when I joined. It was simply Dataflow Solutions, a struggling 5-person startup operating out of a converted warehouse with inconsistent heating and too many espresso machines. I was employee number 5, brought on after my friend Amanda showed the founders an algorithm I had developed during my master's program. They were impressed enough to offer me equity instead of a competitive salary. At 24, with student loans and ambition in equal measure, I took the risk. The company was working on data processing software for businesses, but nothing that made us stand out in a crowded market. During my first 3 months, I worked 16-hour days developing a new approach to predictive analytics that I believed could revolutionize how companies used their data. The core algorithm I created used a novel approach to pattern recognition that could process unstructured data at speeds our competitors couldn't match. "This is incredible, Jacob," our lead engineer at the time said when I first demonstrated the prototype. "How did you even think of this approach?" The answer was simple. I had been obsessed with efficiency algorithms since undergraduate school. While others were partying, I was coding in my dorm room, testing and refining my ideas. The algorithm that would eventually become TechVision's main product wasn't a lucky accident. It was the culmination of years of obsessive work. In those early days, the company culture was everything I had dreamed about in a workplace. We collaborated openly, challenged each other's ideas, and supported each other through the inevitable failures that come with innovation. The 5 of us would work late into the night, ordering pizza and debating technical approaches. We celebrated small victories with cheap champagne and handled setbacks by immediately diving back into the code. When my algorithm began showing remarkable results in beta testing, we attracted attention from bigger players in the industry. Suddenly, investors who had previously ignored our emails were asking for meetings. Our small team grew to 15, then 30. We moved from the warehouse to a proper office in downtown Seattle. The company was renamed TechVision to better reflect our forward-looking technology. Trevor Miller entered the picture 3 years into my time with the company. The board brought him in as CEO to help scale the business. With his MBA from Wharton and experience at larger tech companies, he had the credentials our investors wanted to see. Trevor was tall, conventionally handsome, and had the kind of charismatic personality that dominated rooms. He wore expensive suits name-dropped famous tech entrepreneurs and spoke with absolute confidence about market opportunities. "Dee, your work is the foundation of this company's future," Trevor said during our first one-on-one meeting. "I want you to know that I recognize that, and I'm here to make sure the world recognizes it too." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? His business connections impressed our investors, and our funding increased dramatically under his leadership. We expanded to over 100 employees within a year of his arrival. My team grew from just me to a group of 8 talented engineers who helped refine and expand the core technology. Trevor and I initially had a good working relationship. He would bring me to investor meetings to explain the technical aspects of our product. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding the algorithm and would often ask thoughtful questions about future development possibilities. When we secured our Series B funding round, he publicly credited my work as the reason for our success. The first hints that something was changing came subtly. During an investor meeting about 18 months after Trevor joined, I noticed he referred to the algorithm as our proprietary technology, rather than acknowledging my role in creating it. When an investor specifically asked about the development team, Trevor mentioned several newer engineers, but somehow forgot to include me. It was probably just an oversight, Amanda suggested when I mentioned it to her later. Trevor has a lot on his mind with the expansion plans. I wanted to believe that. The algorithm was my baby. I had nurtured it from concept to prototype to market-ready product. My name was on the patents. My documentation filled the technical specifications. My code formed the foundation of everything we built. The emotional connection I felt to this creation was something non-technical people often failed to understand. It wasn't just work to me. It was an extension of myself. 6 months ago, rumors began circulating about potential acquisition interest. Several large tech companies had apparently approached our board about purchasing TechVision. Our product had become an industry standard with customer retention rates that made competitors envious. The algorithm I had created was now processing data for Fortune 500 companies, saving them millions in operational costs. This could be huge for all of us, Trevor announced during an all-hands meeting. An acquisition at this stage would be a validation of everything we've built. Notice the "we" in that statement. It was becoming a pattern. Trevor's behavior began to change noticeably after the acquisition rumors started. He assembled a special team to prepare for potential buyer evaluations. Despite being the creator of our core technology, I wasn't included. When I asked why, Trevor explained that he needed me focused on continuing product development rather than getting distracted by business discussions. Then he stopped inviting me to executive meetings entirely. When major clients visited, I would learn about it after they had already left. The product roadmap discussions happened without my input. It was as if a wall was being built between me and the company I had helped create. I think you need to be more assertive, my friend Jacob suggested over coffee. Trevor might not realize how this looks from your perspective. But something in my gut told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Trevor was systematically positioning himself as the visionary behind our success, and I was being pushed to the periphery of my own creation. I just didn't understand why. Not yet. The truth revealed itself on a Tuesday morning. I had come in early to finish testing a new feature when an email notification popped up on my screen. Trevor had accidentally copied me on an email thread about the acquisition talks with GlobeTech, one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world. Normally, I wouldn't read emails not meant for me, but my name caught my eye in the preview. Regarding Dee Walker's role, I suggest we minimize her involvement in the discussions Trevor had written to our board members. Her technical knowledge is valuable, but her understanding of the business implications is limited. More importantly, I've made significant improvements to the original algorithm over the past few years. The current product is substantially different from her initial concept. I stared at the screen, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. This wasn't just taking credit for my work. This was actively misrepresenting the truth. The core algorithm remained fundamentally unchanged from my original design. The improvements had been iterative, and many came from my team working under my direction. Without thinking, I stormed to Trevor's office. He was already there, typing rapidly on his laptop. "You lied to the board about my algorithm," I said, not bothering with a greeting. Trevor looked up, momentarily startled before his expression settled into practiced concern. "Good morning, Dee. I'm not sure what you're referring to." "The email thread with GlobeTech. You said you made significant improvements to my algorithm. That's not true, and you know it." He sighed, closing his laptop. "I think you misunderstood the context. In business communications, simplification is sometimes necessary." "Simplification? You're claiming credit for my work." "Dee, you need to understand how these things work in the real world." His tone was condescending, as if explaining something to a child. "Investors and acquirers relate better to me as the face of the company. I have the business background they respect. It doesn't diminish your technical contribution to present things in a way that facilitates the deal." "My technical contribution, I created the entire foundation this company is built on." Trevor's expression hardened slightly. "You created an initial concept, which the company then invested millions in developing into a viable product. No one is saying you didn't play a role, but this is business, not academia. Individual credit isn't how things work." I left his office feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't just about credit. This was about erasing my role entirely. Later that day, Amanda found me staring blankly at my computer screen. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pulling up a chair beside my desk. I told her about the email and my confrontation with Trevor. As I spoke, her expression grew increasingly troubled. This isn't the first time she admitted reluctantly. In the executive meeting last week, when the GlobeTech representatives asked specifically about the algorithm's creation, Trevor talked about how he conceptualized it after identifying a market gap. He never mentioned you at all. Why didn't you tell me? I was going to, but I wanted to gather more information first. Trevor's been systematically repositioning the company narrative for months. In the new investor deck, you're listed as senior developer rather than chief architect and founder. The realization that this had been happening behind my back for months made me feel physically ill. I had trusted Trevor. I had believed we were building something important together. What should I do? I asked, genuinely at a loss. If I make too much noise, I'll be labeled difficult or not, a team player. If I say nothing, my life's work gets attributed to someone else. This was the dilemma women in tech face all too often. Assert yourself and risk being seen as aggressive or difficult. Stay quiet and watch your contributions be minimized or appropriated. Either way, you lose. Document everything Amanda advised, and watch carefully. Knowledge is power in situations like this. 2 days later, GlobeTech representatives came for a formal meeting. I wasn't invited, but Amanda texted me that they were in the main conference room. I accidentally walked in with questions about a feature request, forcing Trevor to acknowledge my presence. "Oh, and this is Dee Walker, one of our senior developers," Trevor said smoothly. "Dee, we're in the middle of something. Can it wait?" One of our senior developers, not chief architect, not the creator of the algorithm they were there to potentially acquire, just one of many interchangeable technical staff. "Actually, I think Dee should join us," said Ryan Chen, GlobeTech's technical evaluator. "If we're discussing the core platform technology, her input would be valuable." Trevor's smile remained fixed, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Of course, if you think it's necessary. Dee, please join us." For the next hour, I listened as Trevor presented his vision for the technology. He spoke confidently about technical decisions that I had made, development breakthroughs that my team had achieved, and future possibilities that came directly from my roadmap. Not once did he acknowledge my role, or even look in my direction. When Ryan asked a particularly technical question about the algorithm's approach to anomaly detection, Trevor hesitated. This was an area I had specifically designed. Perhaps I could address that I offered. That component was part of my original design for the system. What Dee means, Trevor interjected quickly, is that she implemented some of the early code based on the specifications we developed. Anomaly detection evolved significantly from those early versions, of course. I felt my face burn with humiliation and anger. This blatant lie was being told right in front of me, and I couldn't call it out without seeming unprofessional. After the meeting, Trevor pulled me aside in the hallway. His voice was low but intense. "What was that about? We're in the middle of extremely delicate negotiations. This is not the time to be confusing the narrative or making this about individual recognition." "The narrative? You mean the truth about who created the technology they're looking to acquire?" "Dee, be a team player here. If this acquisition goes through, everyone benefits. Your equity will be worth millions. Isn't that more important than who gets credit in a corporate presentation?" He walked away before I could respond, leaving me with the distinct impression that I had just been threatened. The message was clear: stay quiet and take the money, or speak up and risk everything. That evening, I went through my old emails and documentation, looking for evidence of my role in the company's development. What I found disturbed me even more. Several key technical documents had been updated in the company's knowledge base, with subtle changes that diminished my contribution. Where once sections had been attributed to me specifically, they were now described as team efforts, or simply presented without attribution. Amanda confirmed my suspicions the next day. "It's worse than I thought," she said quietly, as we met for coffee away from the office. "Trevor's been systematically repositioning everything for the acquisition. He's told the board that while your early work was valuable, the current product's success is due to his strategic direction and improvements." "That's simply not true," I protested. "I know that, but he's the CEO. His version becomes the official narrative unless challenged directly, and he's making sure that you're not in a position to challenge it." I was beginning to understand the systematic nature of what was happening. This wasn't just Trevor taking a bit too much credit. This was a calculated erasure of my role in the company's success story. And with each passing day as the acquisition talks progressed, my position became more precarious. The acquisition process moved forward with alarming speed. GlobeTech seemed eager to close the deal, and our board was enthusiastic about the potential payout. Within weeks, a team of GlobeTech representatives arrived at our office to begin the due diligence process. Trevor assembled what he called the core team for handling the acquisition process. Despite my central role in creating the technology being acquired, I wasn't included. Instead, I received an email assigning me to prepare technical documentation for a minor integration component. "This is deliberate," Amanda said when I showed her the email. "He's keeping you away from the GlobeTech technical team. They're the ones who would most readily understand your true role." She was right. By relegating me to minor tasks, Trevor could control the narrative presented to GlobeTech. I was being systematically sidelined in the biggest moment of the company's history. My suspicions grew when I tried to access the main technical documentation repository and found my permissions had been changed. I could view documents but no longer had edit access to files I had originally created. When I asked our IT department about it, they said the change had been requested by Trevor, directly citing security during the acquisition process. With Amanda's help, I was able to compare the current technical documentation with backups I had kept. What I found was shocking. My name had been removed from key sections describing the core algorithm. References to my initial research and development had been deleted or modified. In some cases, the language had been subtly changed to imply that the development had been directed by company leadership rather than crediting me specifically. Even more disturbing was what I discovered in the code repositories. The version history on crucial components had been altered. Comments that had contained my name were edited or removed. Code that I had written now included attribution to the development team rather than to me specifically. This kind of retroactive editing took deliberate effort. Someone had gone through years of documentation and code to systematically remove evidence of my central role. I confronted Trevor in his office again, this time with printed evidence of the changes. "These alterations to the documentation and code history weren't approved by me," I said, placing the papers on his desk. "My name is being systematically removed from work I created." Trevor barely glanced at the documents. "Technical documentation involves D. We're preparing for a major acquisition and need to ensure everything reflects the collaborative nature of our development process. This isn't about collaboration. This is about erasing my contribution entirely." His expression hardened. "This isn't a school project where everyone gets a gold star for participation. This is business. GlobeTech is acquiring our technology and company infrastructure, not individual employees' egos. It's not about ego. It's about truth and recognition for years of work." "Look," Trevor said, leaning forward, "you'll get your recognition in the form of a substantial payout when this deal closes. If you insist on making this difficult, you're only hurting yourself and potentially everyone else at the company. Is that what you want?" The threat was barely veiled now. Keep quiet or be labeled as the person who tanked a multi-million-dollar deal. As the due diligence process continued, Ryan Chen from GlobeTech tried several times to meet with me directly. Each time, Trevor found reasons to reschedule or have someone else join the meeting. It became obvious that Trevor was actively preventing direct communication between me and the GlobeTech technical team. With Amanda's help, I managed to access some of the restricted acquisition documents. What I found confirmed my worst fears. In the company overview provided to GlobeTech, my role was described as a supporting developer who assisted in early implementation, 10 years of my life reduced to a footnote. The most painful moment came during a technical review meeting that I was finally allowed to attend. When Ryan asked a specific question about the algorithm's machine learning component, an area I had personally designed, Trevor interrupted my response. "That's actually not quite accurate," he said smoothly, after I had begun explaining my design approach. "The current implementation is substantially different from those early concepts. James can explain how we actually solved that problem." James had joined the company 8 months ago. He looked uncomfortable, but proceeded to explain the current implementation, which was fundamentally identical to what I had designed 2 years earlier. After the meeting, I overheard Trevor speaking to one of the board members in the hallway. They didn't notice me around the corner. "GlobeTech is concerned about key personnel retention," the board member said. "Don't worry about Walker," Trevor replied. "She's replaceable talent. The IP is what matters, and that belongs to the company, not to any individual engineer. Replaceable talent. After 10 years of building the company's core technology, that's all I was to him. Not a founder, not an innovator, not even a valued team member, just replaceable talent. The emotional impact of this systematic erasure was devastating. I stopped sleeping properly, waking at 3 a.m. with anxiety coursing through my body. I began questioning my own worth and contributions. If my life's best work could be so easily attributed to others, what was the point of all those years of effort? Amanda noticed the toll it was taking. "You need to fight this," she said over lunch one day. "Not just for yourself, but for every person whose contribution gets erased by someone with more power or a louder voice." She was right, but I didn't yet know how. Trevor controlled access to the acquisition process. He had the board's trust. He had carefully positioned himself as the visionary behind the company's success. What could I possibly do against that kind of systematic erasure? The answer would come soon enough, in the form of an even greater betrayal. 1 week before the scheduled signing of the acquisition agreement, Trevor called an all-hands meeting. The office was buzzing with excitement. Rumors about the acquisition price had been circulating, with numbers growing more impressive with each retelling. Everyone was anticipating the official announcement. Trevor stood at the front of our largest conference room, looking every inch the successful CEO about to deliver triumphant news. The board members sat in the front row, smiling with satisfaction. I stood at the back of the room, already feeling like an outsider in the company I helped build. "I'm pleased to officially announce that GlobeTech will be acquiring TechVision for $77 million, Trevor announced to immediate applause and cheers. "This represents an extraordinary validation of what we've built together." There was that we again, though the look he gave me across the room made it clear who would be taking credit. As part of the acquisition, Trevor continued, "Once the noise died down, there will naturally be some restructuring to integrate our team with GlobeTech's existing operations. Over the coming weeks, each of you will learn about your role in the new organizational structure." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. This wasn't just about the acquisition anymore. After discussing more details about the transition timeline, Trevor added what seemed like an afterthought. "Some positions will unfortunately be deemed redundant in the new structure. Those affected will receive generous severance packages." His eyes met mine briefly. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my position would be one of those deemed redundant. This had been the plan all along. Not just to take credit for my work, but to remove me entirely from the picture. When the meeting ended, I followed Trevor to his office, no longer caring about appearances or professional decorum. "You're planning to let me go after the acquisition," I said, as soon as his door closed behind us. "After everything I've contributed to this company." Trevor didn't even bother denying it. "Business decisions aren't personal, D. Your role overlaps with GlobeTech's existing technical leadership. It's a simple matter of organizational efficiency." "This isn't about organizational efficiency. This is about making sure I'm not around to contradict the story you've been telling about who really created our technology." Something shifted in Trevor's expression then. The polished corporate facade fell away, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath. "Do you really want to go down this road?" he asked quietly. "You signed an employment agreement with standard IP assignment provisions. Everything you created while employed here belongs to the company, not to you personally. I'm not disputing the company's ownership. I'm disputing your attempts to erase my role as the creator." "Your role," Trevor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me be very clear. After this acquisition, the narrative will be whatever GlobeTech and I decide it. Island. If you become a problem, there are ways to handle that. The legal department has already prepared for potential complications." "Are you threatening me?" Trevor leaned forward, any pretense of collegiality gone. "We'll litigate her quiet if necessary," he said, as if quoting something he'd said before. "Do you really want to spend years and hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting a corporation with virtually unlimited resources over what, so you can say, you wrote some code?" In that moment, I saw Trevor for what he truly was. Not a visionary leader, not even a skilled businessman. Just a calculating opportunist who had positioned himself to take credit for others' achievements and was now preparing to discard those who could contradict his carefully constructed narrative. I left his office in a daze, the full impact of his betrayal washing over me. This had been the plan all along. Use my work to secure a lucrative acquisition, position himself as the visionary behind it, then remove me from the picture entirely. 10 years of my life, my best creative work, all to benefit someone who had contributed nothing to the actual innovation. Amanda found me in the stairwell trying to compose myself. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "He's planning to let you go after the acquisition closes, isn't he?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. "There's something else you need to know," Amanda said, her voice low. "I was in a meeting with the legal team yesterday. The entire acquisition hinges on the algorithm's intellectual property. Globetech is buying TechVision specifically for your technology. Without clear ownership of that IP, there's no deal." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. The technology I created wasn't just a valuable asset, it was the entire reason for the acquisition. And Trevor knew that. "Trevor's been laying groundwork to challenge any claim you might make about your role," Amanda continued. "I found backdated documents with his name listed as the primary inventor and conceptual architect. He's created a paper trail making it look like you were merely implementing his vision." This explained the systematic documentation changes I had discovered. Trevor wasn't just taking credit. He was constructing an alternate reality where he was the innovator and I was just a coder following his brilliant direction. That night was my darkest. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by mementos of my career, a framed copy of our first patent photos from company milestone celebrations, technical awards I'd received for the very algorithm now being attributed to Trevor. 10 years of work about to be stolen in broad daylight by someone who couldn't even explain how the technology worked without a script. I considered walking away, taking the acquisition payout, and starting over somewhere else. It would be the easier path. No legal battles, no public confrontation, no risk of being labeled a troublemaker in an industry where reputation matters immensely. But something my grandmother used to say came back to me. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I had spent my entire career standing for innovation, for technical excellence, for the truth embodied in good code that either works or doesn't. How could I walk away from that now? I called my former professor and mentor, Dr. Sarah Matthews, seeking advice. "This happens more often than people realize," she said after I explained the situation, "especially to women in tech. The question is, what evidence do you have of your original authorship? My name is on the patents, but Trevor's claiming he directed the conceptual development. He's altered internal documentation to support his version. What about your original notes? Early prototypes, emails from the development period." And that's when I realized Trevor's critical mistake. In his focus on altering official company documentation, he had overlooked the evidence I might have kept personally. I still had my original notebooks. I had emails saved from before Trevor even joined the company. I had early code versions backed up on personal drives. "Trevor's created a paper trail, but it's recent and manufactured," Dr. Matthews said. "The truth usually leaves its own trail if you know where to look." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Trevor had power and position, but his entire narrative was built on lies. Lies can be exposed with evidence and truth. "What's your advice?" I asked. "Document everything, find allies who know the truth, and most importantly, identify where Trevor is vulnerable. In my experience, people who take credit for others' work usually don't understand the details of that work. That's their weakness." As I hung up the phone, a plan began to form in my mind. Trevor had orchestrated what he thought was the perfect erasure, but he had underestimated the very person he was trying to erase. I wasn't going to let him win. Not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever had their contribution diminished or stolen by someone with more power and fewer scruples. The darkest moment had passed. Now it was time to fight back. The next morning I began methodically gathering evidence of my authorship. My apartment became command central for what felt like a covert operation. I spread my materials across the dining table, a timeline of truth that contradicted Trevor's carefully constructed fiction. First, I retrieved all my original development notebooks. From the very beginning of my time at TechVision, I had maintained detailed records of my work, including initial concepts, challenges, breakthroughs, and implementation details. These handwritten notes, dated and sequential, provided indisputable evidence of my thought process in creating the algorithm. Next, I recovered emails from the company's earliest days. Conversations with the original founders discussing my algorithm concept. technical discussions with early team members as we implemented the first version. Progress reports that clearly showed I was directing the development, not following someone else's vision. I had fortunately kept these in a personal archive beyond Trevor's reach. I also had personal backups of the original code repositories, showing the evolution of the algorithm with my comments and contributions clearly documented. These backups preserved the true attribution history that had been altered in the official company repositories. With this evidence in hand, I consulted with Benjamin Fraser, an intellectual property attorney recommended by Dr. Matthews. I didn't have the resources for a prolonged legal battle, but I needed to understand my position. Based on what you've shown me, there's no question about your role as the original author, Benjamin said after reviewing my materials. While the company owns the IP due to your employment agreement, your moral rights as the creator are still relevant, especially in situations involving misattribution. What are moral rights? I asked. Even when economic rights to intellectual property are transferred to an employer or other entity, the creator retains certain moral rights, including the right to be identified as the author or inventor. These rights can't be signed away, even in an employment contract. This was crucial information. While I couldn't claim ownership of the algorithm itself, I could assert my right to be recognized as its creator. The key is finding leverage, Benjamin advised. Based on what you've told me, this acquisition hinges on the technology you created. If there's any question about proper attribution or the chain of innovation, it could complicate the due diligence process. With Benjamin's guidance, I developed a strategy that wouldn't require a direct confrontation with Trevor or a costly legal battle. Instead, I would use the acquisition process itself as my leverage. Amanda proved invaluable in this phase. Her position gave her access to the final acquisition contract draft being prepared for signing. What she discovered confirmed Benjamin's assessment. The entire deal hinged on clean intellectual property transfer. The technical specifications appendix is incomplete, Amanda told me after reviewing the documents. It's missing crucial implementation details about the core algorithm, details that only you would know. This was my opening. The technical appendix needed to be complete for the acquisition to proceed. Trevor, for all his posturing, didn't understand the algorithm deeply enough to identify what was missing or to provide the necessary details. With Benjamin's legal guidance, I carefully crafted additions to the appendix that subtly but clearly established my role. I included specific technical details that only the original creator would know, referenced the original development process accurately, and used what Benjamin called legal watermarking techniques, statements that, while seemingly technical, established a clear provenance for the innovation. The key is to be subtle, Benjamin advised. Don't make claims directly about being erased or taken advantage of. Simply document the technical reality in a way that makes the true development history clear to anyone with technical expertise. I also identified key areas in the contract where my signature would be necessary to ensure clean IP transfer. As the named inventor on the patents, my signature was technically required on certain documents, though Trevor had likely planned to handle this through broad assignment clauses in my employment agreement. Benjamin helped me draft specific amendments that would require explicit signature, rather than relying on those general provisions. Amanda helped me submit these routine updates to the technical documentation through proper channels, positioning them as necessary completions of the technical record, rather than corrections or challenges. Given the rush to complete the acquisition, these updates were incorporated without the scrutiny they might otherwise have received. Simultaneously, I began careful conversations with Ryan from GlobeTech, whenever opportunities arose, making sure Trevor wasn't present. I never directly accused Trevor of misrepresentation. Instead, I simply shared accurate technical details about the algorithm's development, establishing myself as the authoritative source on the technology they were acquiring. I've been curious about something Ryan said during one such conversation. The approach to anomaly detection in the core algorithm is quite innovative. It doesn't follow any of the standard patterns we typically see. What inspired that particular solution? This was my opening to naturally explain how I had developed that component, referencing specific challenges and breakthroughs from the early development period. Ryan's growing recognition was visible in his expressions and follow-up questions. You know, the documentation we received doesn't fully capture the elegance of the solution you're describing, Ryan commented. Would you be willing to provide more detailed notes on the development approach? It would help our integration planning significantly. I agreed, providing comprehensive technical documentation that, while focused on the technology itself, made the development history clear. I was careful to maintain a professional, collaborative tone throughout, never directly challenging Trevor's narrative, but simply presenting the technical truth. The risk I was taking was substantial. If Trevor discovered what I was doing before the acquisition closed, he could potentially find ways to undermine my efforts or accelerate my planned post-acquisition dismissal. My entire career in the industry could be at stake if he decided to portray me as difficult or obstructionist. But the alternative, allowing my life's work to be attributed to someone who had contributed nothing to its creation, was unacceptable. Not just for me personally, but for the principle of truth in an industry built on innovation and intellectual contribution. As the signing date approached, I meticulously prepared for every contingency. I reviewed the updated acquisition documents to ensure my additions remained intact. I confirmed with Benjamin that my legal position was sound. I secured copies of all my evidence in multiple secure locations. The night before the scheduled signing, I barely slept. Tomorrow would determine not just my professional future, but whether truth or convenient fiction would prevail. I reviewed my strategy one final time, considering every possible scenario and response. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. Whatever happened today, I would know I had stood up for myself and for the truth of my contribution. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that projected both confidence and seriousness. Today wasn't about emotion, it was about executing a carefully planned strategy. As I drove to the law firm where the signing would take place, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had done everything possible to prepare. Now it was time to see if 10 years of innovative work would be recognized or erased from history. The law firm's conference room exuded wealth and power. Mahogany table leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. GlobeTech had spared no expense for this $77 million acquisition, bringing their full executive and legal teams. Our board members were present, along with Trevor and key TechVision executives. I was only there because certain patent transfer documents required my signature, a detail Trevor had apparently overlooked until the last minute. Trevor looked confident as always in his tailored suit, moving through the room, shaking hands and making introductions. He barely acknowledged my presence with a curt nod before steering a GlobeTech executive away from where I was standing. D. Walker, I'm Marcus Phillips, lead counsel for GlobeTech. A tall man in his 50s introduced himself, extending his hand. I understand you're the inventor named on the core patents we're acquiring today. That's correct, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. I developed the original algorithm and architecture. Impressive work, Marcus said. Our technical team speaks very highly of the innovation involved. Before I could respond, Trevor materialized beside us. Marcus, I see you've met Dee. She was part of our early development team. Now I believe Jeffrey wanted to discuss the transition timeline with you. The dismissal was smooth but clear. Trevor was still controlling access and narrative, positioning me as a minor player even in direct conversations. As everyone took their seats around the table, Trevor ensured I was positioned at the far end, away from the GlobeTech executives. The message was clear: I was a necessary signature, nothing more. Lawrence Bennett, our company's attorney, began the formal process. Today, we're here to execute the acquisition agreement between GlobeTech Incorporated and TechVision, pursuant to the terms negotiated and approved by both parties. What followed was the methodical review of a complex acquisition agreement. Each section was briefly summarized, questions addressed, and pages initialed. Trevor dominated the conversation from our side, positioning himself as the authoritative voice on all matters related to TechVision. My anxiety grew as we approached the technical appendices. Would my strategic additions remain? Would anyone notice the subtle documentation of true authorship I had inserted, or had Trevor discovered and removed these elements? Now we move to Appendix C, the technical specifications and intellectual property documentation. Lawrence announced, distributing the relevant section. Marcus Phillips, GlobeTech's attorney, began reviewing the document carefully. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed him slowing down as he reached the sections I had modified. He read certain passages twice, occasionally, glancing in my direction. Trevor, busy explaining the market potential to a GlobeTech executive, hadn't noticed these subtle signals, but Ryan Chen, GlobeTech's technical lead, who had been reviewing the same document, definitely had. His eyebrows raised slightly as he connected certain technical descriptions with our previous conversations. This section on the core pattern recognition methodology is quite detailed, Marcus commented, looking directly at me rather than Trevor. It describes a very specific development approach. Trevor quickly tried to redirect. Yes, we've always believed in thorough documentation. As I was explaining to the team during development. Actually, Marcus interrupted his tone, professionally pleasant but firm. I'm particularly interested in this section that references the original conceptualization process. It includes specific mathematical notations that our technical team finds particularly innovative. The notations he referenced were from my original notebooks included in the appendix as examples of the development methodology. They were distinctively my work, my approach to problem solving. Trevor looked momentarily confused. These were details he hadn't reviewed because he didn't understand them deeply enough to recognize their significance. Perhaps Dee could speak to these technical elements, since she's familiar with the early implementation, Ryan suggested, giving me an opening. For the next 15 minutes, I explained the technical architecture clearly and confidently, answering specific questions from GlobeTech's technical team. With each response, it became increasingly obvious to everyone in the room that I wasn't simply familiar with the technology, I had created it. Marcus exchanged glances with several GlobeTech executives. Something unspoken passed between them. He then asked for a brief pause in the proceedings. I'd like to confer with my clients for a moment, he said. Perhaps we could take a short break. The GlobeTech team moved to a separate room, leaving us waiting. Trevor immediately pulled me aside, his grip on my arm just short of painful. What did you do? He hissed. What changes did you make to the documentation? I simply ensured the technical documentation was complete and accurate, I replied, maintaining my composure. Everything in that appendix is technically correct. This isn't about technical correctness. This is about you trying to disrupt the acquisition at the last minute. Before he could continue, the door opened, and Marcus returned, but without the rest of the GlobeTech team. Mr. Miller, could we speak privately? He asked Trevor. And perhaps Mr. Bennett should join us as well. Trevor followed them to the adjacent conference room, throwing one last warning glance my way. For the next 20 minutes, everyone remaining in the main conference room sat in uncomfortable silence. Board members checked their phones nervously. I maintained a calm exterior while my heart raced. Finally, the door opened. The entire GlobeTech executive team returned, followed by Trevor, whose complexion had taken on an unhealthy pallor. Marcus carried a folder with what appeared to be new documents. After reviewing certain aspects of the technical documentation and consulting with our team, we've identified a need for some structural adjustments to the agreement, Marcus announced to the room, specifically regarding the leadership transition and intellectual property authentication. Trevor attempted to regain control of the situation. As I explained to Marcus, any minor discrepancies in the documentation can be addressed post-closing. There's no need to delay the process we've all worked so hard to complete. This isn't about minor discrepancies, Mr. Miller, Marcus replied, his tone professionally cordial, but with an unmistakable firmness. This concerns fundamental representations about the development and authorship of the technology we're acquiring. The room went silent. Everyone present understood the implication. GlobeTech had recognized the disconnect between Trevor's claims and the technical reality. We've prepared an amended agreement that more accurately reflects the technical development history and establishes the appropriate leadership structure post-acquisition. Marcus continued distributing the new documents. Trevor quickly flipped through the revised agreement, his expression darkening. Whatever changes had been made clearly weren't to his liking. I'm not sure these revisions align with our discussed terms, Trevor began, but was interrupted by Harold Winters, GlobeTech's CEO. The core terms remain unchanged, Mr. Miller. The $77 million valuation stands. We're simply ensuring appropriate recognition and integration of key technical leadership. Trevor looked to our board chairman for support but found none. The chairman was already reviewing the new terms, nodding slightly. These terms seem to better reflect the technical reality and provide a more sustainable integration framework, the chairman commented. I see no reason not to proceed. With his allies abandoning him and the acquisition at stake, Trevor had no choice but to acquiesce. The revised documents were distributed to all parties for review and signature. When the signature pages reached my end of the table, I noticed the fundamental change immediately. In the organizational structure diagram for the post-acquisition integration, my name appeared as Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to GlobeTech's Chief Innovation Officer. Trevor's position was notably absent. Marcus approached me with the final signature page. Instead of handing it to Trevor as would be customary for the CEO, he placed it directly in front of me. Miss Walker, as the technical architect of the intellectual property central to this acquisition, your signature is required on this particular document, he said, offering me a pen. Trevor started to object, then thought better of it. The room watched in silence as I signed the document that both recognized my true role and secured my future. In that moment, 10 years of work was finally officially acknowledged, not through confrontation or legal battles, but through the simple power of technical truth that could not be erased, no matter how hard someone tried. The acquisition became official that afternoon. As Marcus slid the new signature page in front of me instead of Trevor, the shift in power became clear to everyone in the room. The look on Trevor's face, as he watched me sign the document, was one I'll never forget, a mixture of shock, anger, and the dawning realization that his carefully constructed narrative had completely unraveled. "Congratulations, Miss Walker," Marcus said, as I handed back the signed document. "GlobeTech looks forward to your leadership as Chief Technology Officer of the Integrated Division." Trevor attempted to object, starting to say something about organizational structures and previously agreed terms. But Harold Winters, GlobeTech's CEO, smoothly cut him off. "The terms have been updated to reflect the technical reality, Mr. Miller. We're acquiring this company primarily for its innovative algorithm and architecture. Naturally, we want the creator of that technology in a leadership position." "This is highly irregular," Trevor insisted. "The board approved a different transition plan." "The board approves these revised terms," our chairman interjected, having quickly recognized which way the wind was blowing. "They better reflect the technical value drivers of the acquisition." Within 24 hours, Trevor had resigned to pursue other opportunities. The press release notably omitted any mention of his contributions to the company's success. Justice has a certain poetry sometimes. The weeks following the acquisition were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. After months of systematic erasure and gaslighting, having my role not just acknowledged but celebrated was almost overwhelming. GlobeTech issued a press release specifically highlighting my role as the creator of the core technology and my new position as CTO of their expanded data solutions division. The emotional journey wasn't simple or linear. Some days I felt triumphant, vindicated by the recognition of my work. Other days, the trauma of what Trevor had attempted left me questioning everything and everyone around me. Trust once broken doesn't heal overnight. "It's normal to feel this way," Amanda assured me over coffee, 2 weeks after the acquisition. "You experienced a significant betrayal in a professional context. That leaves marks." Amanda had been offered a senior position in the new organization as well, a recognition of both her skills and her integrity throughout the ordeal. Her friendship had been a crucial support when I felt most isolated. "I keep wondering if I should have spoken up sooner," I admitted. "If I had confronted Trevor more directly when it first started happening." "Hindsight is always clearer," she said. "You handled it exactly as you needed to, gathering evidence and using the system strategically rather than just reacting emotionally. That's why you succeeded." She was right. In retrospect, a direct confrontation would have played into Trevor's hands, allowing him to paint me as difficult or unreasonable. By working within the system and letting the technical truth speak for itself, I had achieved something more powerful than a momentary satisfaction. The experience fundamentally changed my approach to documenting my work. I implemented new practices across our technical teams, ensuring that contribution and authorship were clearly recorded and preserved. Innovation deserves proper attribution, not as a matter of ego, but as a matter of truth and professional respect. "Your documentation standards have transformed how we approach intellectual property tracking," Ryan commented during an integration meeting. "It's actually solving problems we've had for years with attribution and development history." My relationship with GlobeTech evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. Initially, I had seen them as potential enablers of Trevor's scheme. Instead, they had recognized the technical truth when presented with it and had valued authentic innovation over corporate politics. It wasn't perfect. A large corporation never is, but it was better than I had feared. There were challenges, of course. Integrating teams always creates friction. Some of Trevor's allies in the company resented my new authority. Establishing a unified culture took time and patience. But for the first time in years, I was able to focus on the work itself, rather than defending my contribution to it. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the opportunity to rebuild our company culture around values of transparency and recognition. I made it my mission to ensure that every contributor, regardless of title or seniority, received appropriate acknowledgement for their work. "You've changed the entire dynamic of the technical organization," Benjamin observed when we met for lunch 6 months after the acquisition. "People feel secure in their contributions being recognized." "It's the culture I always wanted," I admitted. "One where innovation is valued for itself, not for who takes credit for it." Amanda remained my closest ally throughout the transition. Her unwavering support during the darkest period had created a bond that transcended typical workplace friendship. "You know what I realized through all this," she said as we celebrated the successful completion of our first major post-acquisition project. "Standing up for what's right is contagious. Your refusal to be erased has inspired others to ensure their contributions are properly recognized too." She was right. Several junior engineers had recently begun more confidently presenting their innovations, no longer content to let others take credit for their ideas. The culture was shifting in subtle but important ways. The lessons I learned through this experience went far beyond professional attribution. I learned about the courage it takes to stand up against systematic erasure, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry. I learned about the power of quiet, strategic resistance versus reactive confrontation. Most importantly, I learned that truth, especially technical truth, has a resilience that can ultimately overcome even the most carefully constructed deception. 10 months after the acquisition, I received an Industry Innovation Award for the algorithm that had started this whole journey. As I stood on stage accepting the recognition that had nearly been stolen from me, I thought about all the unnamed innovators throughout history whose contributions had been successfully erased or attributed to others. My victory was small in that larger context, but perhaps it could serve as an example that erasure isn't inevitable. Building a career based on authentic contribution rather than political maneuvering isn't always the easiest path. There will always be those who seek to claim others' achievements as their own. But ultimately, true innovation speaks for itself to those who understand it. The technical truth has a clarity that office politics can never quite obscure. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: trust yourself and your worth, even when others try to diminish it. Document your contributions, not out of ego, but out of respect for the truth. And when faced with those who would erase you, remember that the truth backed by evidence and expertise is more powerful than any narrative built on lies. Has someone ever tried to take credit for your work or ideas? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more stories about standing up for yourself in professional settings. And if you found this helpful, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve recognition for their contributions. Thank you for listening, and remember your work matters and deserves to be attributed correctly.